I'm Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic, and it's good to be here. It's a privilege. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something, probably about steps 6 and 7. I did 6 last week, but we're just going to talk about 6. Listen, 7. This is about my life. It doesn't have to be about your life. This is about my life and my experience. You know, they say our stories disclose, in a general way, what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. And I may not know much, but I have a story to tell you, and it's about me. So it's got some authenticity. I was told the only thing you need for a good AA meeting is to be sincere, and once you learn how to fake that, you got it made. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself. I've been sober. I'm in my 42nd year of sobriety, and so I've been around here a while, and which means I've had 47 years of ego deflation and death. And nobody needs ego deflation and death more than me. I've had that, I've got a new perspective in 47. The way I think right now, the way I see things like now, and the dots I've been able to connect are not like the way I was thinking 20 years ago when I had 20 years, or 30 years ago when I had 10 years, or even 3 weeks ago. Things have changed, and most of the time they've changed because of repeated humiliations and the final question of our self-sufficiency. And so I want to talk a little bit about a few things today. Stuff that you maybe haven't heard before, which is good. It's good to come to, sometimes what happens, I know I have a real heart for newcomers. I love newcomers. I love talking to them. But what my real, mission statement is now, 73 years old, and I guess my mission statement has a real heart for guys with like 20 or 30 years or 15 years. I have a real heart for men who are sober and women who are sober, but they're not happy with their sobriety. Especially the ones that are not happy with their sobriety, and they know they're not happy with their sobriety, but they've been going to AA for 10 or 15 or 20 years. And when you've been going to AA for 10 or 20 years and you're sober, you understand what I'm saying? And you're not drinking and you're going to meetings and you're not happy, you don't know where to go. Does that make any sense? You just don't know where else to go. Because if you're here for 15, 20 years and you're not drinking, isn't that what AA is all about? Don't drink even if your ass falls off. Don't drink and go to meetings. Isn't that what AA is all about? Not drinking? And if you're not drinking, you're a success. That's what they told when they came in. You can screw up the whole world. If you haven't had a drink, you're a success. But what do you do if you're like 50 years old or 60 years old or 40 years old and you got 15 years or 10 years and you're not happy with your sobriety? And you have anxiety. Well, you're not going to go to your group because, not that you give a crap what other people think about you, but you're not going to tell a group of people where maybe you're the guy you're sponsoring 3 or 4 people or 5 people, or maybe you're doing the steps that night, or maybe they're all sort of looking up to you, you know what I mean? And you haven't maybe they're all sort of clapping for you because you picked up that 15-year medallion. You're going to tell them, listen, I just want to let you know I think about suicide a lot, and just the other day I wanted to kill myself, and I feel like I'm a piece of crap and I'm not going anywhere, but I don't know you're not going to tell them stuff like that. You don't even tell yourself stuff like that. Do you think it's possible to stay sober for 15, 20 years, and 30 years and not be happy?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of, you've been there, huh? Yeah. You ever heard of anybody with 5 years who drank again?
Yeah.
You ever heard anybody with 10 years who drank again?
Uh-huh.
Ever hear anybody with 15 or 20 years who drank again?
Uh-huh.
You ever hear anybody in AA say, well, I've been around AA for like 30 years, but now I got 90 days or stuff like that, or... You hear that actually more times in AA than you hear anything else. There are more people, I was told that statistics are, and this could be wrong, that only 1/2% stay sober for more than 20 years, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're even happy. That's 1 in 200. AA's been around 100 years, if everybody stayed sober in AA, and we're rocketing in the 4th dimension of existence and experiencing much of heaven and knowing peace, if everybody did that, this room would be loaded with, the newcomers couldn't come in because there'd be nothing but guys with 30 and 40 years. And, you go to an AA meeting, there'd be 300 people, there'll be 2 guys with 40 years. About 20, you hear the birthdays read out at meetings, and a bunch of people with 1 year, a couple people with 2, 5 or 6 or 3, 4, you get up to around 10, and then they get more. And they get somewhere around 20 years, nobody with 20, nobody with 21, one guy with 22, nobody with 23, nobody with 24, nobody with 25, one guy with 26, one guy, and then all the way, there may be one guy with like 30, you know what I mean? It's like sparse up there, you know what I mean? Many are called, but few are chosen. And so what's happening to them all? And they're sober. A lot of people are sober. They're not happy with this, but they can claim physical sobriety, but they can't claim being rocketed in the fourth dimension of existence. They can't claim experiencing much of heaven. They can't claim that they've lost fear of economic insecurity, and they're not worried about what other people think about it. They can't claim any of that stuff. And listen, these are people that go into meetings and sponsoring people. They can claim that they're doing enough. They may not even claim this, because the truth of the matter is their self-awareness of what they're doing and what they're not doing is skewed, because the disease, which is still running rampant in their lives, although they don't know it, is not looking like drinking anymore. It's looking more like thinking. It's like it's part of their being, and they don't even know they have it. This is just the way they are. And they can't think any differently than they're thinking right now. And so all they know is they're not feeling good, they're not experiencing life, and they think they're doing everything. It's like most people in AA. They're doing everything that you're supposed to do in AA, right? What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to sponsor people. You're supposed to go to meetings. You're supposed to not drink. You're supposed to read the material. They're doing everything in AA. The only stuff they're not doing is the stuff they don't want to do. Stuff like going to church. Because the big book, did you ever see this? It says, this is the founders. This isn't the conference, whoever the conference is who says don't do this stuff. But the founders said, we encourage church membership. And the reason they said that is because that's what they did. They wrote this book, Rarely Ever Seen a Person Fail, who was thoroughly followed our path. There was one atheist. They gave in to him. God, you understand, if you're an atheist, it's okay. But the founders said, we encourage church membership. Most of us belong to such institutions. They did that. And the reason they did that is because it worked for them to hang out with people other than just AA people who were talking about God, so they could center their life on God. But you see in the big book, because we are all codependent, you understand alcoholics. You understand that alcoholics worry about what other people think about them. As a group, we're all worried about what other people think about it. That's why when you're in a group and you're talking, when you talk, before you open, you either don't talk at all because you're scared to talk, or if you talk, very careful not to say anything where somebody might talk about you behind your back, because you feel so deficient as an alcoholic. Unless until an alcoholic accepts his alcoholism and all his consequences, his sobriety will be precarious and true happiness will find none at all. And one of the consequences of alcoholism, the drinking's not alcoholism, drinking's just a symptom. The alcoholism centers in your mind, not your body. It's the way you think. It's actually the way you process things. And one of the consequences of being an alcoholic is you have this deep, abiding feeling that you're unworthy. If you'll buy a brand new Corvette and you'll feel worthy for a while. If you're a guy, you'll hook up with a good-looking blonde, march her around. People look at you and you'll feel worthy for a while. You'll make a lot of money, you'll feel worthy for a while. But the worthiness isn't true worthiness. It basically comes with the stuff you can buy. If you're a lawyer or a doctor, you feel worthy because you're a lawyer or a doctor. You lose your bar card, they kick you out of medicine, you're not worthy. You're driving an old car, not a new car, you're not worthy. You don't have a girl, you're not worthy. So you have no worth. You know you have no worth. You know you're a piece of crap. I'm not talking about you guys. I don't want you to get offended. I'm talking about some of you guys in some of my other groups that I go to. Different types. I can tell that you guys are emotionally a cut above most alcoholics. But so you're probably not identifying with any of this stuff. But I have the kind of alcoholism where I feel unworthy, but I don't know I feel unworthy. You understand? Because what I'll do is I'll sit around and I'll talk in such a way that you'll think that I think I'm worthy, because I'll say things that will make you think I'm worthy about myself. And then if you think I'm worthy, I'll feel worthy, because I get my worth based upon what you think about me. You understand? Even though I don't know that and I won't admit that. You understand what I'm saying? But it's a horrible way to live your life. And it's the true alcoholism, which doesn't go away because you put the plug in the jug. It gets worse. It gets worse. And you don't even know you have it. Until some schmuck like me comes at an A meeting and starts talking about it, you say, holy shit, I got that thing. What is that deal? He's talking about me. I'm not talking about the guys here tonight, you know what I mean? Not you guys. So I'm going to talk about things like 6 and 7 are called old-timer steps. And the reason they're called old-timers, there's a reason why in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was written when the longest guy had 4 years. Longest guy at sober had 4 years. You know, I'll tell you when they found about 6 and 7, when they figured out about 6 and 7, when Bill Wilson at 20 years sobriety was like suicidal. He wrote it. It's in the story. It's in the book. He was like suicidal at 23 years. 23 years the guy wrote the book. How does that make you feel? 23 years he was like suicidal. He was depressed. He was going nuts. And he wrote an essay on something called emotional sobriety. And he finally started, at 23 years, he finally started to put together the concept of emotional sobriety and 6 and 7. There's a reason why 6 and 7 in the Big Book takes 2 small paragraphs. You know, the paragraph after we comfort, we do this, and now it's step 6, and then we say this prayer. That's it for step 7. Go on, we go on to 8 and 9. All the other ones are stuff you do. You know, we admit. You know, we come to believe. We make a decision. We make a decision by saying this prayer. So I've done step 3. You make a decision by saying, I've done step 3. I got down on my knees. I said the prayer. I've done step 3. You know, I'm convinced. Being convinced. We're now at step. I'm convinced. I made a decision. Of course, if I was really convinced that there was a God and he loved me, why am I always scared all the time? Because I'm not really convinced. It's just like so being convinced. So then there's step 4. We made a list. Make a list. You did step 4, right? So you should be wonderful. Know everything about it. You do step 5. You confess to other people. You do step 5. You know? Step 8, right? You make another list. Step 9, you actually do the amends, right? And then there's step 6 and 7. Step 6 is what? That's the step that separates the men from the boys. Not so fast. Not so fast. You know, it's like being on a rocket ship and, you know, you're waiting for the second stage to separate from the first stage. And for most people in AA, the sad news is there'll never be a separation. They'll never separate. They'll never separate. All they'll do is they'll continue to be in the not drinking club and thinking that they're okay because, number 1, they're going to meetings or not. Number 2, they're sponsoring people. They're doing all the stuff around AA that makes it look like they're in AA. They even talk about God sometimes. They'll even say the Lord's Prayer at meetings. You know, they'll belong to a group, but they'll never really separate. There'll be something. It'll be like the guy in Alcoholics Anonymous number 3 who says, I knew there was, Bill Dotson, I knew there was something more, something I hadn't got, something a person ought to have, a release, a happiness, something. I was sober, but it's sort of like the way I play golf. I got Titleist clubs. Who am I kidding? I play golf. I'm not looking mad. I play golf like once every 10 years. You know what I mean? I've already stopped it. But I got the clubs at home, Titleist. I got the ball. I got the whole outfit, you know? And I get out now. I play golf. I do the 18. I do the thing. And I play a couple, and Tiger Woods plays golf. But we're playing a different game. You understand that? So it's like AA. There's a bunch of people playing golf like me, and there's Tiger Woods. And I say, why can't I be like Tiger Woods? Because Tiger Woods is doing the stuff because to obtain the things that most people never obtain, you got to do the things most people will never do. So the Tiger Woods in here, the guys who obtain this thing, do the extra credit stuff. You see, because since we're so worried about, God forbid, we wouldn't want somebody walking. You know, in the old days, you had to prove to them that you were ready to come down. You had to prove to them. They didn't beg you to come in. Let the dog hit you in the ass. If you are, they wouldn't argue with you. They'd say, why don't you try some controlled drinking? That's what they did. Before you were allowed to go to an AA meeting, read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. Read what they were doing. You had to get down on your knees in front of everybody else in AA and give your life to God. Well, you'd probably say to me, well, that probably weeded out a lot of people. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. You ever hear somebody say, man, if they had done that talking about God when I came in, I wouldn't be here. I said, no, you wouldn't. The only guys who'd be here were the guys who got down on their knees and gave their life to God. And you know what you would have? You'd have a lot of people talking about God. You'd have a lot of people focused on God. You know? So the 6th step is come to believe. What does it say? Not come to, what is it? We became ready. We became entirely ready. Okay, think of things like this. Let's see what they're talking about. Let's just throw out some shit, okay? Throw out some stuff. We're now on the new basis of trusting and relying upon God. We never apologize for God. We never apologize for God. It says it twice. All men of faith have courage who trust their God. Instead, we let God demonstrate in our lives what we can do. And once we outgrow fear, we become to outgrow fear. We utterly abandon ourselves to God. There is no middle-of-the-road solution. God either is or he isn't. What's your decision going to be? Yeah. But we won't know you. We don't know that. Only God knows that, and your real reliance has to be on him. He'll show you how to create the fellowship you crave, and you should hang around. You understand? We encourage church membership. Just read through the books and see everything they say about God. If a mere code of morals, a better philosophy of life would have helped us be sober a long time ago, but did not work for us because we lack power, the power to live. We had to find a power which would solve our problem. That means we wrote a book where, of course, we're going to talk about God. Here's where the problem happens. Because alcoholics, one of the symptoms and one of the consequences of being an alcoholic is we hate God and we hate people that think about God and talk about God. And then it says this, we lose all prejudice, even against organized religion. About atheism, you know what it says about atheism? This sort of thinking has to be abandoned. That's AA. Wholeheartedly, utterly commit yourself to God. Period, end of story. That's what it's all about. That's what the deal's all about. So some guy gets up in an AA meeting and he says, well, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in this crap and I don't drink and everything like that. Nobody says a frickin' word. Nobody says a word because, we got to be tolerant. He says something diametrically opposed to what the program is about. There's newcomers saying, you don't need God. We don't even care. We're happy because because we're tolerant. No, we're not tolerant. We're cowards. Alcoholics are cowards. We don't go up to God and say, look, I love everybody, and you can be an atheist all you want, and you can be an agnostic, but don't be saying that stuff around here because we have a book. It's our basic text, we all agree. And it says that sort of thing has to be abandoned. We have a whole book, we have a program that says you got to get rid of this stuff. We understand maybe you'll get rid of it, maybe you won't get rid of it. You're entitled to come here because the only requirement membership is not drinking. But don't say that crap in front. There's newcomers here. No, we don't say that to them. But the guy who talks about God, we say, listen, cool it on the God thing, you're killing newcomers. And that is because Alcoholics Anonymous is made up of alcoholics. And this is not Well People's Anonymous. It's made up of a bunch of people that are sick alcoholics. They're not well. They don't really want to work the steps. They just want to work it to such a point where they don't have to do anything uncomfortable. That's what we call the truth, by the way. That's what we call rigorous honesty. That's where we're at. So, and that's it for everybody. That's it for me. That's the way I understand who I am and why this thing is happening that way. And when we get together in large groups, and even guys with 10 years and 20 years are saying that crap and not seeing the hypocrisy in it, you got a real problem. Because I've got a big book that says go one way, and you got a group of people saying go a different direction. And nobody's even noticing it. They just do what alcoholics do. They just follow along with the crowd so they can blend in. And because if you're an alcoholic, you're a please love me alcoholic. So let me talk. So this is why most people don't really get emotionally sober. Okay? So let's talk about some different, let me throw out some different things to you, okay? Above everything, we must get rid of selfishness. We must start kills as God makes that possible. And you know what else it says? It says we have to quit playing God. You know what it says? We have to quit playing God. Now, what you won't see at most meetings, I don't ever remember going to a meeting where they talk about this, is what do they mean by playing God? If you don't know what they mean by playing God, if you don't know what playing God means, if the one thing we got to do is we got to quit playing God, if you don't know what it looks like to play God, then you don't know whether you're doing it or not. Do you understand what I'm saying? You don't know whether you're playing God. And above everything, we got to quit playing God. So how do you know whether you're not playing God? How do you know you're not 20 years sober and playing God? How do you know you're not 15 years sober and playing God? The books they found absolutely essential in AA. And this is conference approved material. Not that I give a crap about the conference, quite frankly, but I care more about the founders. before we got, smart and started putting that committee together to change things, you know what I mean? And homogenizing this program and sanitizing this program and pasteurizing this program in such a way so that nobody would be offended. Before we got together and did all that, so that it's like a form of religion but without power. Before we made the program powerless to change lives, so that you could be in here for 10 years and 15 years and actually get bored in AA because you hear the same old drunkalogs in a program where nobody's drinking, where drinking isn't even the problem. But that's all they do. They want to talk about the drunkalogs over and over and over again, because they have this concept that if you're not drinking, you're okay. You understand? So you must be doing it right because you're not drinking. And the longer you're sober and not drinking, physically sober, the more okay you think you are. Because they give you a medallion. You got a 20-year medallion. I must be doing great. Then why is it I have all these bad thoughts about myself and other people? How come I don't feel good? You understand what I'm saying? Well, you understand what I'm saying, but you really don't know what the solution is. That's the problem. Some of you know what the solution is. But the solution is uncomfortable, because it means you have to be the one to stand out and do something for yourself that most people will not do, and that most people may laugh at you for doing it. But then again, most people don't become emotionally sober. But what happens is there comes a time in everybody's life, I shouldn't say everybody's life, there came a time in my life, and I've seen this happen with many, many people, where they come a life where not only is not drinking not enough, you actually hit sort of like a glass ceiling, where you're doing all the work, but life gets horrible. So what happens when you're doing all the work and life gets horrible? And here's, when I came into AA, I absolutely believe I took the first step. I hit bottom. I know I hit bottom because, the reason I know I hit bottom is not only because I'm sober now, but I know I hit bottom because I was willing to do things that there's no way I was willing to do. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like why not for my sponsor 3 weeks sober, and I was sober, and I said I had no money and I needed money, and he said to me, I know what your problem is, and I was a lawyer. I graduated with all these degrees, and he didn't even graduate the 6th grade. He was a used car salesman. I said, I don't have any money. What am I going to do? And he said to me, I know what your problem is. What's my problem? He says, you need to start making coffee. Well, I'm not stupid. That had nothing to do with my problem. I mean, and I didn't want to make coffee. And I noticed he was the one who was making coffee for the group. And it crossed my mind. I was absolutely sure that that's how they get people to make coffee and get out of the job. He said, you got to make coffee. Well, I know I hit bottom. I know that now, looking back, and this is probably one of the reasons I'm sober today, because instead of saying, I don't need this crap, I'm going to get another sponsor who doesn't understand me or anything like that, I followed him over to the stupid coffee pot. And he showed me how to make the coffee, and I watched him. And the next day, I didn't want to go back to the meeting, but I had to make the coffee. I made the coffee for 18 months for that group, making coffee. 3 months down the road, the money problem disappeared. Some guy came up to me and says, I'll make the coffee. I said, I'm the coffee maker. Who appointed you, Because you hit bottom because you're doing stuff that nobody would do. They're telling you stuff that makes no sense. And I'm not going to go into it. I've told you the stories, how would you feel if it didn't bother you and all that sort of stuff. A lot of you, I'm not going to repeat myself on that because I have lots of stuff to cover here. So what happens is I know I hit bottom. And I don't know what hitting bottom was for you. But hitting bottom for me was at 31 years old, at 3 o'clock in the morning, being so alone. I don't even call it loneliness. I mean, it's like you're out in Venus. You're orbiting outside the solar system. There's not another human being you can call on or talk to. You feel so bereft of any human contact or alone. You feel so low. You feel like your life is over and hopeless. You know it'll never be better again. And you've already reached the point, you can't stop drinking, so your life is over. That, where you're looking in the mirror and you're saying, who am I kidding? That's where I was at. I was overwhelmed. Bill Wilson describes it great. I didn't memorize his whole description. It had clothes around him. What do they call it? The cold, whatever it is that his loneliness comes in. It was just totally unbelievable. So I hit that bottom. So here's what happened. So I was crushed. My sponsor used to say, don't rob an alcoholic of his desperation. Every alcoholic has to have his last drink. We're out there trying to save people from consequences. Please don't drink, please don't drink, I love when Dr. Bob went to sponsor, who was it, what's his face, the brewmaster, Clarence the brewmaster, and he walks on Clarence, and the first thing he says is, do you believe in God? And Clarence says, you can check this out, this is conference approved material. He said, and Clarence says, what does that have to do with it? And Dr. Bob says, everything. And he says, well, I guess I do. He says, guess nothing. He wouldn't get it. He says, guess nothing. You either believe in him or you don't. Half measures avail us nothing. You know what I mean? God is either everything or he's nothing. I mean, A takes a stand. Everything or nothing. Everything or nothing. Here's the hint, okay? AA believes everything. You know what I mean? Central fact. This is the great fact for us and nothing less. God has become the central fact of our lives. We're convinced that he lives in our hearts and minds, which is indeed miraculous. What if they were actually serious about this shit? Can you imagine if they were actually serious about it? They came out of the Oxford groups. The Oxford groups, the first century Christianity. These guys were serious. They were reading the Bible. In Dr. Bob Goodall says the books that we found absolutely essential. I mean, if you actually read the Bible, because I ultimately got into the Bible because I wanted to have more and do stuff that most people won't do. If you read the Bible, then you realize that 90% of the stuff in the big book, I like to say 90% of I'd like to say most of the Bible is stolen from the big book. 90% of the big book is direct quotes from the Bible, from Scripture. But if you never read the Bible, if you never study it, you wouldn't know that. You think you're reading an original manuscript. You don't realize you're reading the words of the Apostle Paul. You don't realize you're reading the words of the Apostle Paul. You don't realize everything is out of the gospel. You don't realize it. But you start reading this stuff, and you realize why they say in Dr. Bob Goodall, the books that he found absolutely essential in order to live was 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, and the book of James. And why is that important? Because the Bible is much bigger than the big book, and it gives actually examples of all the stuff, like the stories. The Bible's all about stories of people who, as crazy as we are, who somehow came to themselves and were reborn. It's just another big book. And what it says in James, the book of James, we were almost called the James Club, and this is important to understand this. It says this in chapter 1 of the book of James. It says, if anyone lacks wisdom, and God knows alcoholics lack discernment and wisdom about themselves, all he really has to do is ask God. And God, who is generous, will give him the answers, will give you the wisdom. But when he asks God, this is what it says, he can have, listen to this, no doubt about God's existence and who he is. The man who has doubt, see, that's why I like the Bible, because it states it clearly. The man who has doubt cannot expect to receive anything. He will receive nothing. He is like a wave in the ocean. A wave in the ocean. He'll go here and there, unstable in all his ways. That's the book they were reading. You know what it says in the big book? Half measures avail us nothing. We have to completely get rid of our old ideas. Or the result was nil, which is nothing. It says crazy shit like that. But here's what you think. You think that's not true. Because you think if you do 50%, you get 50%. I mean, after all, I'm not drinking. But not drinking doesn't solve the problem, because the drinking is not the problem. That's why everybody who comes today, even people with 1 day or 2 days, get the not drinking thing. But 0.5% get the rocket in the fourth dimension thing. They all get the not drinking thing, which is the easiest thing to get. But nobody gets the rocket in the fourth dimension thing. Because they doubt God and they don't believe in God. Because they're playing God. Because what they become after 10 years is something called spiritual agnostics or spiritual atheists. That is people that don't really believe in God, really believe in the same stuff they believed beforehand. It's all about money, power, sex, and romance and all the things. And they sort of add God on, but they'll say the Lord's Prayer. But what their life is really centered upon, don't kid yourself, is the money. I mean, it's not important. It's just right up there with oxygen. It's all about the money and the romance and the cars and the popularity and stuff like that. It's nothing about God, because God has nothing to do with their lives, except occasionally they go to an AA meeting, they take them out of the glove compartment. You got a flat tire, they'll take them out of the trunk. They'll come in here, they'll say the Serenity Prayer, they'll say the Lord's Prayer. Maybe they might vote that out, too much God. Some guy will be talking about God, they'll sort of turn him off, you know what I mean? And then they'll walk up to some guy and say, don't talk too much about God, you're killing newcomers. And then they'll actually tell people that they believe in the big book and what the big book's talking about, and they have no idea what the big book's about. They don't have a clue, because they're agnostics. They're atheists. They don't really believe in God. They don't proclaim God. Anybody, the people that don't apologize for God never apologize to God because they have courage. They talk about God at meetings. Very few of them around. Very few of them around. So, here's what happens. What happens is this. The way we grow in AA, and they talk about this, isn't it funny? They talk about this actually in step 6 and 7. How do we grow in AA? How do we, what's the sixth, you know what the sixth step says? Here's what it says. This is how they describe the men as opposed to the boys. The men who are the ones who finally become ready, entirely ready to have God remove every defect of character, including not worrying about what other people think about you, anything that stands in the way between them and God. Anything has to be removed. And this is what it says in the big book, by a statement made by a well-loved clergyman. If you got problems with the Roman Catholic Church and you got problems with all your churches and everything like that, and people who said they were Christian, they hurt you and everything, I don't really want to hear about it, because I'm just listening to a guy who's not sober, who's still got a bug up his ass, he's still got resentment, and you're not willing to do what it says in the big book. Give up our resentments and our prejudice even against organized religion. I don't want to hear, I don't want to hear about your last drinking escapade. I don't want to hear about your problems with the Roman Catholic Church. I don't want to hear your problems about your father who shoved Christianity down your throat or Judaism down your throat. I don't want to hear about all your beefs against organized religion. I don't want to hear about the Crusades or any of that shit. You know what I mean? I don't want to hear any of that stuff, because I've been listening to alcoholic bullshit all my life. I want to hear about guys who are sober, who love God, who utterly turn themselves over to God. I don't want to hear about all the excuses as to why you won't do this thing or why you don't believe in this thing. I don't want to hear about your agnosticism, because that's all I'm listening to. Because what if it's a virus and I catch it? Then I'll be as screwed up as you are. You understand what I'm saying? Because the guy that tells me in the sixth step that if I'm entirely ready, I repeatedly do the things I have to do to get closer to God so I can grow in the image and likeness of my Creator. And fortunately for me, I know who my Creator is. I have a clear vision of my Creator. And it's hard to be walking towards your Creator, because I can look in the mirror and see my Creator, I can see me, and I got a lot of work to do. You know what I mean? I see where so what I did is very simple. You don't have to do it. They kept on talking about this guy, St. Francis of Assisi. You ever see that prayer and everybody's talking about how can I be sad? So I talk that Francis of Assisi and Mother Teresa and all these people like Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, and Clarence and all these people they were talking about, and Sam Shoemaker and Ed Dowling and all that. So I know who their God was. So I just said, why do I have to invent one? I'll just use their deal. Seems to work for them. What does it say? If you want what we have, you're willing to go to any length to get it. So if somebody says, will you sponsor me? And I say, well, why don't you do this? He said, well, I don't want to do that. I said, well, I guess you don't want what I have. Because if you want what I have, you'll do what I did. So I wanted what they had. I wanted what Al Kennedy had, so I just did what he did. That saves a lot of trouble, because I don't have to reinvent the wheel or reinvent God. I would just do whatever they did. And so I followed some guy in the Bible study, and that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years after I was 10 years sober, when I hit that glass wall. But the thing is, I'm getting ahead of myself now, because what happens is, as you go through life and you're not complying, you're just resting on your laurels, you're just staying sober, you're satisfied with that, and you've bullshitted yourself into believing you're actually doing something, and you're doing something, you're helping people, it's not like you're doing it, but you bullshit. What happens is, your alcoholism and God sort of come down to let you know that you're not doing as well as you think you are. You know, you're sober 2 years and all of a sudden you're going wacky because you're broke. Or, you know, you're sober 10 years, you're going wacky because your wife left you. You're going, all of a sudden you're sober and you're going to meetings and you're helping people, but your life is falling apart. Not only on the outside, it's falling apart on the inside. And where do you go? Man, I'll tell you something. If you got 3 days or 3 weeks or 6 months and your life is falling apart, this is the greatest organization in the world. You got a year and a half and your life is falling apart, this is the greatest organization. You come in here and you got 4 days and say, I'm in love with a camel. 5 guys will get up, buy a cup of coffee and tell them, yeah, they were in love with camels too. You know what I mean? Yeah, they will, you get, but man, I'll tell you something. You get 10 years and you start talking bullshit, they will beat the crap out of you. You know what I mean? You know, you don't want to be talking about too much or having problems after you got 10 or 15 years because you're supposed to be better than that, and you know you're supposed to be better than that. Because now you're getting basically your ego, you're getting your jollies from at least people looking up to you in AA, you know? You know, because then that false pride comes in. But you got all this false pride that comes in and say, I got 10 years, I got 15 years, I got 20 years, I got 42 years, whatever it is, and you start thinking you're doing okay. You understand? But you know deep down inside, you're not doing okay. You know, what do you do then? You got nobody to talk to. Maybe you have a sponsor, maybe you don't, but even if it's a sponsor, you're not going to bother him and say, blah, you know, I mean, you're going to try to work it out yourself like you always have done. And you know what you're doing now? You're playing God. You have no God. You have no God, you have no people. You're not talking to God because you never talk to God. Every once in a while you say the serenity prayer or something like that. You're not serious about the thing. You basically believe like you've always believed. If you want something done, you better do it yourself. You better think yourself out of this thing. Try to figure out the answer. Maybe you go to a psychiatrist, they'll give you a pill. Maybe you go to a psychiatrist, they'll give you a pill. He said AA is good, but you know what? AA and this Thorazine will work even better. Xanax or Klonopin or whatever they're handing out these days. Because you tell a doctor, he doesn't know. He says, he gives you a pill, he says, suck on this. I have no idea what your fucking problem is, but why don't you chew on these things so I can work on somebody who has a real problem, because I have no idea what the hell's wrong with you. You know, and then you get, you know, and you don't have to, because you're not doing what they're telling you to do in the big book. Because you don't even read those paragraphs, and those paragraphs you throw out. Because you don't want to be one of those people in AA that talk about God, not what God has done for you, and demonstrate what he has done for you in life, and then have people laugh at you. You understand what I'm saying? Laugh at you. Because you don't really believe in God. So now we're on the 7th step where you humbly ask him. Humbly ask him means you give up the ghost. You know, I can tell you know, people who believe in God and believe that God is real and that he's alive and he's alive. You know what happened? You know what they do? They talk about him. They talk about him. That's why when you read the stories of the big book, there's all this God stuff all over the place. There's all this God stuff all over the place. God, 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 God. The only time you don't hear about God in AA is if you happen to be in an AA meeting. Oh, it's all over the big book. It's in the steps on the wall. It's all over in every story. But if you really want to make sure you're insulated by never hearing about God in a person's life, just go to an AA meeting. You'll never have to worry about hearing about God because we're all pasteurized, sanitized, you know. I was actually talking to a church group yesterday, which was like a Celebrate Recovery. It's like, because I talk to those groups too, you know what I mean? But I'm usually much nicer to those groups. I don't use the F word. But I mean, but when I go to those groups, I beat up on them too because I just like beating up on people. Because, you know, I said, you guys don't go to AA, right? You don't go to AA because you think you're like better than them? You don't go to AA because if you go to AA and you talk about God, you're scared they're going to beat you up because you're basically cowards. Because the Lord says you leave 99, you go after the ones. Maybe the ones they need. I mean, we all got this bullshit going on in our mind. That's what God wants us to do, what he doesn't want us to do, and things like that. And so what happens is, the next thing I want to sort of talk about in here is, there's this spiritual atheism in here. You get to a point here's, how did you get sober in the first place? This is how you got sober in the first place. What do you do when you're doing life a certain way for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and it's not working? And it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. You finally hit bottom, and you explode and you die and you get to the end of your rope and you get down on your knees and you walk into A and you pick up a white chip in front of a bunch of people, right? So let me suggest something to you. That's not the only first step in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's not the only hitting bottom in Alcoholics Anonymous. Ego deflation and depth, like they talk about, that hitting bottom thing will happen for the rest of your life. Because you're never going to get perfect, but it's going to be little hits bottom. A little hit bottom. It's got like a little bottom here and a bottom here and a little bottom here. You're going to go along and doing the things you're doing, going to your 3 meetings, then you're going to hit a bottom, then you're going to go to 5 meetings, then you're going to hit a bottom. You get better stuff. You're going to hit a bottom. The way we change is, they talk about it, is through pain, repeated humiliations. And you'll do that for about 5 years to 10 years. And if you're fortunate, when things get really bad, or maybe things will actually get really good, and one or two things will happen. You'll either drink again, and that may or may not be your bottom after 10 or 20 years. Or things will get so bad emotionally for you that you won't be able to handle it anymore. And you'll do what I did, and you'll say, I really need help. I'm all screwed up. I got 10 years. I don't know which way it's going. I'm worried about everything. And you'll run into the right guy, or you'll know who the right guy is. And you'll run into him and say, what do I do? And he'll say, you need to start going to Bible study. You need to bump this thing up a peg. You need to bump it up a peg. Now, I'm not saying you should go to Bible study. Just like in the Big Book, they say, this is optional. Each person has to figure it out for himself. I mean, I love the way Clarence put it when he said, Dr. Bob said, he said, do you believe in God? Yeah, blah, blah, blah. He says, okay, now you say you believe in God, get down on your knees by the hospital bed. We're going to say a prayer. I don't know how to pray. I guess you don't. We're going to pray. He pray. And then this is what Clarence says. He says this line. He says, I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. I did. You know what was the greatest time in my life as an alcoholic? When I had a sponsor and I just did what he told me to do. When I didn't have to think. When he said, you're going to be making the coffee. You're going to be doing intergroup bank maturing. You're going to be doing this. You need to go talk, blah, blah, blah. You need to go talk to that guy over there. You need to be the greeter in the room. When I didn't have to think, I could pick up the phone and say, I feel like I need to go to the bathroom. What should I do? Go to the fucking bathroom. My wife says I need to do it. You know what I mean? And I didn't have to think. But then I started getting sober, and I started getting smart, and I started thinking for myself, and I started playing God. And I started deciding what the program was and what the program wasn't, and what I should do and what I shouldn't do, and how great I am. And I started thinking, and you can't help but think this. It seeps in like a virus that seeps in. You're sober 10 years, you're sober 20 years, and no matter what you say about God, deep down inside, you're doing all this stuff. You're going to meetings, you're sponsoring people, you're doing a ton of crap. You know what I mean? They're coming up to me and saying, I really like, and here's what happens. You start thinking, and it's subconscious, that you are keeping yourself sober. It's not that you don't believe in God, it's just that you believe in you. It's the God of your understanding, and he pretty much looks like you, and he likes you a lot, you know what I mean? And he doesn't beat you up or hurt you, tells you you're doing a pretty good job, You keep up the good work, you know what I mean? You'll figure this thing out. And you're playing God, you don't even know you're playing God because you really don't have a God, you have you. You decide what's right, and you decide what's wrong, and then you don't have to ask any questions of anybody because you're self-reliant, you're living life on self-propulsion again. And you got 20 years, and who's going to talk to you? Who's going to tell you you're full of shit because you got 20 years or 42 years or something like that? So, prove it. So I'm going to prove it to you. This is step 7. So it takes humility. I was going to give you actually my world famous talk on humility, but I never do it with a group this small. So, So this is page 72. I'm reading this right out of the book, okay? This is right out of the book. Just in case you're thinking that maybe, he's just telling me stuff that isn't, this is conference approved. Conference approved. But even if it wasn't conference approved, it's actually correct, So let me read to you what it says in the book. It talks about having problems. This is by the time you got into step 7. I mean, by the way, step 6 is the one they said repeated humiliations. Step 6 is the one that separates them ever. Step 6 is when you crash and burn, and through repeated humiliation, final crushing. Step 6 is the one where you become entirely ready, and you do these things because not to get more money or anything like that, to get closer to God. You start taking God seriously. You start taking them seriously, and now you're on step 7, where now you really want it. So you're actually humbly asking. You're actually humbly asking Him to get rid of your defects of character. And this is what it says on page 72 about us, about you, about me. It says this lack of anchorage to permanent values, this blindness. You think you're delusional when you first walk in here? You get real delusional after you walk in. This blindness to the true purpose of our lives. The true purpose of our lives, it says in the big book, is to become close to God and perform His works well. God has works for you to do, and I'm going to tell you something. You may think you know what His works are. There may be a lot more than getting laid and going and making money and buying a nice house and going on vacation. He may have some works for you to do that you wouldn't believe. He's got some stuff for you. You know what I mean? When you stop worrying about what you want to do and start being more concerned about what you think God wants you to do. And in order to be concerned about what God wants you to do, you better figure out who He is. Because if you're thinking about what you want to do or what you'd like to do instead of what God wants you to do, you are definitely on the wrong path. You know why I don't have a bucket list? I don't need a bucket list. Because I'm doing right now what God wants me to do. This is what I do. This is my mission statement. You know, if you're in here, you're a priest. He didn't save you. You don't you remember you made a decision to turn your will and your life over to God? It's not your life anymore. You had your life. You fucked it up. You drove it into the wall. You know what I mean? It's His life. It's His life. It's His life. It doesn't belong to you. This lack of anchorage to any permanent values, this blindness to a true purpose of our lives, man, and that's the truth about alcoholics. When I get a call from a guy who's 20 years and 30 years sober, and he's a thumb-sucking crybaby, and he doesn't know what's wrong, I say, you have no purpose in your life, do you? You have no purpose in your life. You have no clue as to what your purpose is. You're a man without a purpose. You're whining about the cars, and the bars, and the women, and the bond, and this, and that. You have no purpose, no reason for even being alive. You don't even know why you're on the planet. You know, I feel sorry for you. You're 50 years old, and you're like a 2-year-old. You got no purpose. It's so obvious. It really isn't. You don't even have to guess. It's obvious. It's not obvious to them. This blindness to the true purpose of our lives produced another bad result. For just so long as we were convinced that we could live exclusively by our own individual strength and intelligence. This is not first step stuff. This is not about the drinking stuff. This is a guy that's already reached step 7. He's sober 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. This is what they're saying about you. They're saying, it says, for just so long as we're convinced that we could live exclusively by our own individual strength. That means individual strength. We don't really need God. And intelligence, because we're all so smart. For just that long was a working faith in a higher power impossible. And then it says, this was true even when we believed that God existed. Now, this is the screwy thing. You could believe in God and say you believe in God and even believe in God, and they say, even though if you believed in God, your faith is worthless. Remember, this is a program to develop a faith that works. Your faith is worthless. It's not working for you. You know why it's not working for you? Because He's still not the centerpiece of your life. He's not the centerpiece of your life. He's not the only thing you think of. Like the Bible says, Old and New Testament, pray without ceasing. You know what? You turn things over to God, but you're not living a turned over life. You don't wake up in the morning thinking about God. You don't go through all through the day thinking about God. You don't hang out with people that are just talking about God. You don't read books about God. Your whole life is not about God. That's for, crazy people like Russell Spatz. he's freaking crazy. You got to watch out for him. You know what I mean? The guy is really, man, he fell off the planet. You know what I'm talking about? Got to watch out for guys like that. He's killing newcomers. Did you know that? Murdering them, you know? Yeah, I'm killing newcomers, but I'm saving guys with 20 years. But our own individual strength and for just so long as was working faith and higher power impossible. This was true even though we believed that God existed. We could actually have earnest religious beliefs which remained barren, which I don't think is a good thing, because we were still trying to play God ourselves. Are you playing God, or are you a believer, or are you just a faker? You know, they say you can fake it till you make it, but at some point you got to make it. Are you a true believer? Do you really believe that God exists? Do you believe God's the central factor of your life? Yes. Do you believe he's all powerful? Do you believe he's everything and not nothing? Do you believe that? Do you really believe that? You know? Or be truthful. Do you really not believe that? Or does it sort of scare you to actually think? You walk away from here saying, man, I don't know whether I can do that deal. Well, if you can't do that deal, or even want to do that deal, then you don't want to do this deal. Because this isn't my opinion. I'm reading from this book. You're here, am I supposed to talk about the seventh step? This is a book about the seventh step. This is conference approved material in the seventh step. And I don't care much for the conference, but this is the conference approved material about the seventh step. If you don't like what I'm saying, it's not that you don't like me. You don't like the seventh step. So don't act. So when somebody says, have you done the steps? For God's sakes, don't say yes. Don't say yes. Don't lie. You're just lying to yourself. This was true even if we believed that God existed. We could actually have earnest religious beliefs, which remain barren because we're still trying to play God ourselves. As long as we place self-reliance first, a genuine reliance upon God was out of the question. That basic ingredient of all humility, a desire and seek and do God's will, was missing. We have a concept, as you know, I guess nobody's going to walk away from this meeting saying, I think that guy's a Hindu, and there's nothing wrong with being a Hindu. But I want to talk about a concept that we have that changed my life, and the concept of something called lordship. I never quite understood it, that there was a difference between saying you believe in God and making God the central factor of your life. Making him the central factor of your life. Bill Wilson and those guys, they hung around with guys like Father Ed Dowling. They hung around with people like Sam Shoemaker. That was their sponsors. That was the spirit. These are guys, Ed Dowling was a Jesuit priest. Sam Shoemaker, a reverend involved with the Oxford movement. These were guys, their whole lives were devoted. It's not that they were focused, but they were devoted to believing in God. They were everything. These men were everything that most people in AA don't want to hear about. That shun. And that's who they hung around. That's who they wanted to be like. That's who they wanted. And they wrote a book about it. They wrote a book about what you could do if you really wanted this stuff. And that's why they talk all about utterly abandoning yourself to God. See that your relationship with him is right and great events will come to pass to you and countless others. That's why they wrote a book all about finding God and being and trying to change so that you grow in the image and likeness of God, and that half measure is not going to avail you anything. There is one who has all power. He can help you. That one is going to be God. May you find him now. That's why they wrote a book about this stuff. And then Alcoholics Anonymous took that book and they ran it through the shredder and they took out all the words and everything like that. And they turned it into not drink and go to meetings. But Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship, couldn't destroy this book. They couldn't destroy this book because the problem is, every once in a while, because you know why? Because even though everybody in AA liked it, because they didn't talk too much about God, they didn't run it past the disease of alcoholism. You understand? They didn't explain the disease of alcoholism, that the disease of alcoholism had to sort of go along with the deal. And what the disease of alcoholism says, I like what you're doing here. Messing with this thing and making it weaker and taking out the power, And so every once in a while, the disease of alcoholism comes through and cleans out all the horse shit. and they go to jail, or they drink, or they commit suicide, or they pop the pills, or they self-destruct, like Carl Menninger said in the book Man Against Himself, alcoholics and men and women not destroy themselves. And they destroy themselves because they shun the God thing. And they didn't counter the fact that every once in a while somebody, gets rocketed up and breaks through that, that escape velocity where they actually buy into this stuff. And they believe what they say. And so you'll have people in AA, and I'm not the only one, there are people in AA that are not scared to talk about God. They will let him out there. And so it doesn't matter whether most people will do it. Most people won't do it. They won't do it, but a few will. A few will be interested. They might have to go through a few little poundings, a little punishment until they actually get into it, but that's what the 7th step. That's why the 6th and 7th step is not something you do. The 6th and 7th, you don't work 6 and 7. 6 and 7 works you in conjunction with the disease of alcoholism. It works you. You do what you want to do for a period of time, and you get pounded. And then you adjust a little. And then you work a little bit more the way, and then you get pounded, If you're fortunate, you will ultimately grow into 6 and 7, and you'll be entirely ready then to do it. You'll be entirely ready to do this thing. If you're not fortunate enough, the way you might do it is you might drink again. I was fortunate. I was blessed, okay? I could have gone one way or the other. I could have gone the drinking route, or the popping pills route, or something like that route, or leaving AA. And I hit the emotional bottom route where it got painful enough where I actually asked somebody for help. It's tough to ask somebody for help when you have 10 years, or you have 20 years. It's easy when you got